It'll be John 3:3. So get there early. Let a few more people filter in. Good morning to everybody. Hope you're all good and well. I forgot that I can't move away from this. I guess I could. You wouldn't hear me. And maybe some, thank you, some benefit to that. Morning, Keith. Well, the official welcome. First of all, an announcement. We will not be having the Agape group here at the building tonight. If you happen to be one of the people who comes to that, we have several people sick in that group. Not sick of that group, but sick in that group. So we hope to reignite that next week. So that will be off there. We'll announce that again. Secondly, how many books are we down to, Michael? Okay, so if you're interested in getting the book, Rediscover Church, let's see if you can remember. What's the name that I often give it? And we had this talk last week. We're going to talk a little bit more. Reconsider Church as well. So it doesn't say that anywhere, but the first 3 or 4 times I referenced the book, I actually called it by the wrong title. And so since it's in my head, it might as well be in your head as well. Last week we talked about what is a church. We didn't quite get done. I wanted to just go through some of the things that we were talking about at the very end when we kind of got rushed about that. And then we're going to go into a topic, hopefully smooth into of who can belong to a church. So have your thoughts kind of on that. But one of the things that I didn't give to you, if you go in and look up online qualities of a healthy church, you can find a variety of things in a variety of orders. But I found one that I like that I just want to share with you, since we're talking about rediscovering church and kind of recommitting to it in a post-pandemic world, hopefully post-pandemic world, or maybe somewhere down the road, post-pandemic world. Some qualities you can look for in a healthy church: biblical evangelism, biblical discipleship, biblical membership, biblical leadership, biblical teaching and preaching, biblical ordinances, biblical worship, biblical prayer, biblical fellowship, biblical accountability, biblical giving, and biblical mission. Now, what's interesting about all 12 of those things, they all start with the word biblical. But what happens when we apply biblical to something? What happens when I apply it, and Sam applies it, and HC applies it? When different people apply biblical to something like that, what oftentimes happens?
Right off the bat, you got to turn off a certain amount of people.
Okay, bye. Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry. By the way, Myron is our mic.
Perception of what they think church is and what things biblical are.
Okay.
Also, by the same notion, applying to yourself, if you go with the biblical attitude, it's going to change your whole concept of everything. You run the world out, and you're straight towards how the way God is. I mean, how the way God wants things done.
Okay.
And you'll learn how God is from that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
But you've separated yourself from the world anytime you do anything biblical. And that's the way we're supposed to be doing it.
Set apart. We're actually going to use that phrase today, set apart. So
another word we need to apply is literacy, biblical literacy.
Okay.
And learn what that means.
Okay.
I'm just starting.
You got 40 minutes. Go ahead. You want to take the...
No, I'm just starting to learn that.
Oh, I see. Okay. But if I were just to pick any one of those 12 of what you think that looks like, or what I think that looks like, I guarantee you we would not have unanimity on thought on that. For example, biblical worship. I entered into a discussion this week with a really good friend of mine who I taught in school many years ago, who's in the ministry, and he took to task modern day Christian music. By the way, I'm not saying he's wrong or right. I'm just saying he took it to task. But in doing that, he engendered this conversation that last time that I checked had 83 comments about what that looked like to the people who were commenting back in on that. And it looked a lot different to a lot of different people about what that meant. And yet everybody agreed we need biblical worship and we need biblical music in worship. But what does that necessarily mean? By the way, that's a rhetorical question. And that happens on just about everything when we talk about, what is a healthy church. It may be a little bit different, look different from one person to another. But kind of keep those things in mind about, when you examine us, when we examine us, how do we look on those things? How do we look like, for example, one of the lists I looked at, this one had biblical, and I don't think they listed them necessarily in importance per se, but one of them had biblical mission at number 1 versus the last one, because they ingrained evangelism and mission as one item and saw that as a really, really critical, important thing to be able to do. So anyway, what is a church? Dwell on that a little bit. When you see opportunity to kind of think about, okay, what do I think that really means? What does a church really look like? What does our church really look like? Does it look like other places? And kind of go from there. Today we're going to be talking about who can belong to a church. And I want to take a church out of the equation at the moment and just talk about joining things. So what are some things that we join in the world where there are some, I guess, requirements? Can you think of some? Raise your hand high or yell as loud as you can. Yes, sir.
Country clubs.
Country clubs, okay. And if you join a country club, there are certain things you're kind of responsible to do. I mean, you can't, and depending on what they are, and there are places where you can't play golf in a tank top at a country club, or you can't, in some places you can't play tennis without wearing all white, because that's the way they used to wear it. So there are those requirements, and usually when you join, I got a great story. Well, maybe it's not a great story, but it's a me story. I was playing golf at a private place here in town that I'm not a member of. I'll never be a member of. If I fell into a vat full of money, I could become a member of that. But when I went in, I missed the sign in the men's club. I didn't even see a women's club. A men's club where it says, "Please remove your hat." The general manager of the club is a former student of mine. He's a current parent of mine. And so we have a relationship. And the last time I was there was about probably 10 years ago. I was sitting just sitting around talking to the people we'd played with. I was obviously a guest that had been invited to play. And he comes in and makes a specific point to come over to me and say, "You need to take your hat off." Doesn't say, "Hey, Dave, welcome. I hope you've had a great day. Hope you hit not too many into the ponds and whatever." First thing he said to me was, "You need to take your hat off," which I missed the sign. But I guarantee you, had I ever been a member, that's probably the first thing they tell you is, okay, here's some of the things you need to know. You can't wear your hat in the building ever at all. So that's right. Country clubs have this list of things that you kind of have to know. What's another one where if you join something, you kind of need to know what's involved with that? Are there fees? Are there dues? Are there responsibilities? Sometimes joining something really is not just as easy as kind of wandering in and saying, "All right, well, I'm a Democrat now," or "All right, well, I'm a Husker fan now," or whatever it might be. There may be something in all that really says you can't just say it. You have to kind of identify with it. Okay, how is a church different? How does a church become something where you join it. What's involved with that?
Right from the start, right from the very beginning,
Myron.
it's a conviction of the heart.
Yeah, we all need everybody here.
I just want to make this simple. Right from the start, it's a conviction of the heart. You've made a 180 in life. You no longer look at things the way you used to look at things. And you realize that anything that can be burned ain't in the direction you want to go. Anything that's going to last forever, that's where you start.
Okay.
But right off the bat, you have a conviction of the heart. I'm wrong. I do believe that Jesus Christ was sent here to redeem me from my sins and to hang on the cross.
Good.
And you go from there.
Okay. That's a really, really good way to put that out, is that you go from, but we're going to use actually the word conversion and a little bit about the conversion of our hearts and what that looks like if we are, in fact, belonging to a church. Is it possible, and when I say this is maybe, I'm talking to me, we're talking to us, is it possible to be a casual church member and be effective, what God wants us to be? Is it us as a body to be as good as we can possibly be? Is it possible to be casual in church membership? Taking a little different look at like fandom, like I can be a fan of my team as long as they're winning, and if they're not winning, Jim and I talk about this, Hubbard and I talk about this all the time. We're generally fans of the Reds through about 100 games of the year. And then when they're out of it, I don't really even check the box scores anymore. If I was totally diligent and totally bought in, maybe I would say, I don't care if their record is 60 and 95. I'm still going to kind of be invested in what they're doing. If they get the momentary win or whatever, maybe that's going to be a little bit of what is involved with me. So is it possible for that? And do we struggle with the casualness of being a member of a church? That's something that, if we're honest, we would say that's really kind of what we have to deal with at times. What was the word you used that I said we were going to come close to? Conviction. Okay. Then I talked about conviction. I want to talk about conversion. In belonging to a church, there's a conversion. What's the conversion to at the core? What is the conversion to at the core of our relationship with the church? What's the essence? Are we going to come here if we feel like that Buddha is a viable alternative? More than likely not. That's not going to be what we're doing. HC?
I was going to say, the relationship, somebody comes into our church, or any church, they're looking for the relationship. Are the people friendly? You don't think I'm loud enough? Are we friendly? Do we care about one another? Are we showing Christ in our lives? And do they see that? And as they see that, and they may not be a Christian, it may be their first time walking in a church. And if we sit on our thumbs, don't say hi or anything or any relationship, they're probably not coming back again. But when we're outgoing and we visit with them, talk to them, and they see that we love one another in the church, which is setting Christ's example, they're going to want to stay and be part of us. And that will give us the opportunity to convert them.
Okay. What has to be at the core of us being able to convert someone else to our belief in Jesus Christ? What has to be at the very center of it? Our own conversion. If I was this is one of those questions about if we were in a smaller room, I think I'd probably get more feedback on this, but when was your conversion story? This man right here talks about his conversion story came when he was 15, and he'd gone to church, quote unquote, all of his life. He'd gone to the building all of his life. But when he was 15, he decided that he wanted deeper. He wanted to be part of Christ. He wanted to be identified with Christ. He wanted to reflect Christ. That was 15. Many of us have been baptized maybe for a long time and maybe not necessarily totally been converted to what we've been baptized to. It's possible to happen, to go up and say, yes, I want to go through the motions. I want to make sure that I'm safe or whatever it might be. I want to be baptized, but maybe we're more wet than anything else, as opposed to deeply changed and say, this is really what I want my life to look like as a follower of Christ. Does anybody just really quickly want to throw out their conversion story? Here we go, right here. Okay, just hang on just a second. Okay, go ahead.
I wanted to look for truth to the scriptures. And so before I was converted, I had to read the Bible to make sure that the church was following those rules.
What triggered you to want to do that? I mean, what in your life said, what I have right now isn't what I really want?
Well, I was triggered because my husband's family were members of the church, and I just wanted to make sure that they were doing what they were supposed to do or where they were supposed to go. So that's what.
So you were checking up on them first, and then that's a good thing. I mean, to check out if they say they're going to be something, are they being what they say they're going to be? And in all that, you discovered what you wanted to do. Good. What else? Who else has their conversion story? John has one.
Well, my pursuit started way earlier than I realized, but I always wanted to be a believer. I just didn't want to become one. Okay, and so it took me a long time to think about it. And I was in high school, and I met a girl, and she took me to church. And then she handed me a pamphlet. I never read the pamphlet, and we soon broke up. And that summer was over, and so was my church going. And then a little lady called Ruth Spomer started to call me because I went back to church on one Sunday. My dad would get so upset on Sunday morning when she'd call early enough to get me out of bed, his only day to sleep in. And anyway, through her persistence, I learned what was true. And through it was not a real committed conviction, but I knew I needed to be baptized to be saved. I just remember when I found out what a disciple was, and that's where the actual conversion happened, is when I started reading Scripture and that the world is lost, and the only way they can be saved is through Jesus. So I baptized the first 3 people that I met after I learned that, and that kind of stuck with me and has made my life very different.
Good. Excellent. There are probably moments in our life, if you remember, when I was 12, I was baptized. I knew that was something I needed to do. My dad was a preacher. My mom was probably the most godly woman I'd ever met. We had devotionals all the time. We talked about it all the time. I knew that was in my plan. I knew that was prescribed for me. If I was to say that I feel like I was 1,000% changed or immersed in doing what Jesus wanted me to do at age 12, that would be a falsehood. In fact, I seriously remember after being baptized, pretty quickly thinking, this is not easy, and I'm not necessarily, I really haven't changed being bad to my brothers or whatever else it might be that's supposed to, I'm supposed to be better now. And I wasn't better now. I believed I was on the path to it. But even in the midst of all that, even though I was converted when I was 12 and had a conversion story, there are a lot of rocky paths along the way where my conversion took some pretty serious tests. what are some obstacles to being converted, either before you are or once you are, that really kind of sometimes really hinder your ability to be a good functioning part of a church? What are some things that get in our way? We are a perfect group. I love it. Let me ask you this real quick. Go ahead, Sharon.
Well, coming from a denomination, when I said I had to look for the truth, I really didn't just switch off like a light switch. Mm-hmm. There were things that I wanted to bring over, and they didn't fit.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. When somebody is converted, or when somebody comes into the body of Christ and they haven't been here before, there's some things that really can kind of throw them. Terminology can throw them. What if you become a Christian, and all of a sudden you come to worship with your brothers and sisters, and they say, okay, now we're going to have the Lord's Supper. And you're going, not a clue what that means, what's involved with it. And this, maybe that wasn't given in the conversion story about this is going to happen frequently, and here's what we do with it and what it looks like. Or it might even be, what are some of the practices we have here? When you came, Sharon, when you came from a different body, you may have found that, your worship looked different, that your practices of when you met looked different. If people just got out the door as quickly as they can, if people stayed for an hour after, if people called each other, whatever it might be, probably tons of practices that may have looked different elsewhere than when they look right here. It could even be where you sit. Some churches have assigned seating. They're not realistic. I mean, you just get you there first, and that kind of becomes your place. And there are times even the customs that they have maybe are different than what you grew up with. Some people grow up with really long services. Some people grow up with really short services. Sometimes there's a mixture of the style. Sometimes there is just difference that you say, well, that's not the way we did it. I mean, that's not, I came from someplace else, different walk of spiritualness. We never did it that way. And sometimes that can provide obstacles to people. I guess sometimes a good thing maybe to reflect on, or at least I did, if and when you ever got married and you blended your marriage in terms of your practices that you came to the marriage from, what were some things where you said, hey, we didn't do it this way when I grew up? Christmas comes to mind for me, that we never did Christmas morning. We always did Christmas Eve. That's somewhere in the Constitution, that Christmas Eve is something that you're supposed to do. And, figuring that out as a small thing, at least it was small to me. I'm not sure it was always small to Sally, but it's one of those things where you say, okay, that's different than what we've done it before. That's a different way of thinking than what I've ever had before. Can you think of some other things when you blend together with something that you say, I've got to change and adjust my way of thinking that maybe relates to church? Kathy?
I grew up in a different church, and when we went to the Christian church when we got married. And I think I went for 3 years, and one Sunday I said, I think I need to be baptized. But I'd grown up going every Sunday since I was a baby, and I thought I was fine. It's like, oh my gosh, I missed something somewhere. And then when we started going to the Church of Christ, HC's parents were offering to buy a piano for him because they thought we were destitute. I mean, it was a big church, and it's like, well, we can buy you a piano. And I teased my dad. I changed churches so I didn't have to play the piano and organ anymore. But I mean, it's like I was leading the worship service. If the piano and organ messes up, the whole thing falls apart. So I really like this because I don't have to do that anymore. But it's just, it was very different when we went, even from the Christian church to the Church of Christ, because of music. Mm-hmm. That was an interesting, but I love it. I don't care. It's awesome.
But the church part of you then had to make an adjustment to what this is and what that looked like and whatever. And in the middle of all that, probably whatever the topic might be or whatever the circumstance may be, there is the need, the struggle about, okay, I believe this is the way to do it. I believe this is truth. How do I handle grace with that? How do I handle, somebody who doesn't quite see it that way? How many, when we talk, okay, when we went through COVID, we went through a lot of different things, protocols, this, that, and the other. When we by necessity had to go to slides for the music and recorded music for everybody, I think I'm on the very, very small minority of people who really kind of like singing along with the slides. I mean, I thought, that sounds pretty good to me. I mean, I voices are good. I don't think I could maybe make that group if there's whatever it might be, but I like that. And I thought, well, everybody's going to like this. Well, in conversation, found that not everybody did like it. In fact, when we talked to people about what do you miss most about being together, the number one thing was the way we sing and the way we blend our voices together, not necessarily some voices from people in Dallas or wherever it might be along with ours, which there's not anything wrong with that. It's just not what we feel like is really best for us. So there are those things where you have to say, okay, we got to be gracious about that, because if we dig our line in the sand right there, so no, I prefer slided music, or I prefer just that way right there, and that becomes an issue point, then what we've done is in this church that we have joined together, we've weakened it. We've weakened it unnecessarily. So grace is a critical part that when you become a member of a church, hopefully is one of the very, very first things that you learn. We probably, all of us, can remember a time where we were, whether it's in church or whether it's in school or wherever it is, that we did something in an earnest attempt to do well that wasn't good. Or maybe we missed the mark or whatever. And there were two ways that people could approach us about, hey, here's how you did. I'll never forget one time I got up and gave a talk at the old folks home. Man, isn't that funny? I mean, I'm practically there myself, but in York, Nebraska, there was an old folks home, and we went out there every Sunday morning from our church. Somebody went out, and I gave a talk. And I got up, and it was like a 3-minute talk. I don't remember the topic. It certainly wasn't worthy of making a series out of it. But I made it through. And when we got done, 2 people approached me. One of them said, a little old lady, well, everybody was old, but a little old lady came up to me and said, "That was wonderful. I appreciate what you did." And then another guy came up to me and he goes, "You need some work. You can do a lot better than that." Now, the one that stuck with me was the second one. Well, actually, both stuck with me because I remember both. But the one that really kind of affected me was the second one. And no room for grace in that about, hey, you've never done that before. Here's maybe something that down the road you could look at. Really would kind of make you maybe a little bit more effective. Anyway, so a heavy dose of grace over us is a really, really important thing when we become a member of a church and when we become part of what we do here. I promised June that we were going to look at John 3:3. So if you would turn in your Bibles to June. June, you're really great, but you do not have your own book yet. Somewhere down the road, it could happen. Okay, John 3. It says, Jesus teaches Nicodemus. And I want to read this to us, and I want you to tell me, we're going to hang on 5 verses. We're going to start 1 through 3, and then we're going to rest for a minute and go to 5. Now, there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a member of the Jewish ruling council. He came to Jesus at night and said, "Rabbi, we know you're a teacher who has come from God, for no one can perform the miraculous signs that you are doing if God were not with him." What's that statement about? When Nicodemus says this to him, what's he telling Jesus? It's what? It's obvious you're something. So he makes a great statement of faith. And he came to him at night. Just out of curiosity for background, what might the night have had to do with anything there? secrecy, a little bit of maybe even the opportunity to say, if I'm out in the middle of a crowd and there's opposition all around you, it might not be the good time to jeopardize what I have if what is there isn't really going to be worthwhile. But he comes to him, and when he says to him, we know you're a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the miraculous signs you're doing if God were not with him. He makes a bold statement, but also not a bold statement, but an obvious statement. We've seen it. What's the difference in what he says to Jesus here than maybe what other people did in their approach when they saw what Jesus did? They tried to deny it. They said, we're not going to do anything. I mean, we see that he can do this, but we're not buying that. But when Nicodemus comes to Jesus to do this, without reading that into that, without him just coming right out and saying it, he's obviously saying, what do I do here? What do I do with what I've seen? Do we do that a lot? Aren't we supposed to do that a lot when we read something and we mull it over and we say, what do I do with this? What is something that I should be changed by this, or I should be affected by, or somehow be more effective with what I do? In reply, verse 3, Jesus declared, I tell you the truth, no one can see the kingdom of God unless he's born again. And Nicodemus asked a question in verse 4 that probably seemed incredibly logical to him, and then Jesus gives him an answer. How can a man be born when he is old? Nicodemus asked. Surely he cannot enter a second time into his mother's womb to be born. Jesus answered, I tell you the truth, no one can enter the kingdom of God unless he is born of water and of the Spirit. What do you think Nicodemus heard when he heard that? And what do you think we need to hear when we hear that? Nicodemus's approach. What do you think was, and he says, let me go here a little further. He says, flesh gives birth to flesh, but the Spirit gives birth to spirit. You should not be surprised at me saying you must be born again. The wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. Anyway, they're involved in this conversation, but the critical part of this right here is you must be born again of water and Spirit. So what does that tell us? When Jesus tells Nicodemus this, what is he telling us in terms of our relationship with Jesus? There is a requirement, and that requirement is be baptized. That's exactly right. I think we go with an assumption right here at this particular place, in this particular body, in this particular way that we follow, that's a given. I mean, that we believe that baptism is something that is a critical thing that really is the sign that says, this is me saying I'm converted. This is me saying I'm washing off my sins. I'm dying to the world. I'm dying to my own life. I'm giving up my life. I'm making my life totally into the hands of Jesus. So that brings about my question that I asked earlier. When you were baptized, like I said, when I was 12, it didn't feel that way to me at that point in time. I didn't feel like, okay, I've got this total Teflon away from sin, this skin that will bounce off all sin all the time. So that conversion, that baptism, that necessity that we want to have, that we embrace to have, how does it work for us? How does that empower us then to say, I want to be totally converted? How does that work? How does the baptism work for us as we become part of what this church is? Dennis? Poor Myron. He's up here. He's up here.
Okay, hang on.
You wearing a Fitbit, by the way? Okay.
Him on my time.
I forgot what I was going to say. No, at the moment of baptism, you brought this to me. It was a very big moment.
Mm-hmm.
It was away from the world and to the church.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, it was a big moment. Yeah, you might have felt like nothing happened, but then again, nothing happened in the world, to the world. But in the world of the Spirit, you just joined it. The first words I heard out of the man's mouth was, "Man will always fail you, but God never will."
Mm-hmm.
I was given something that nobody can ever take from me.
Mm-hmm. That's
Ever,
true.
Ever. And I was given something to look forward to. Through the hard times, through the good times, I got this.
Yeah.
And I'm part of this,
Yeah.
you know. And what could be better?
Yeah. And in our weakest spots as a church, as a family, what Dennis said there is really true, is that our conversion can't be taken away from us. We have gotten that. We have identified with Jesus. That's at the core of everything that we do. And when we become a member of this body, hopefully we function best as a body when we care for each other and we take looks at each other and say, what can I do to help you as a member of this particular body? When we come together, like we will in about 40 minutes, and have communion together as a body, as a member of this church, we have that relationship with Jesus, obviously. I mean, that's the reason. But along with that, as members of this church, as members of this body, we're also sharing that experience to the point where we can say, this is what makes my life be an encouragement, or be encouraged when I look across and see someone who is sharing that walk with me, who is sharing that struggle with me. I know, and by the way, I guess it goes to this. If our church membership doesn't really resonate with us a lot, then we may want to look at it and say, okay, what am I missing? What is it that I am not really getting out of this that I should be? And every church is not created equally. I mean, we talked last week about the ones that I've gone to, that the one in Rose Hill, Red Cloud, Nebraska, 25 people in it. You couldn't hide. I mean, if you were one of the 25, you were doing something. Or the one of 2000 and when I was in college, where you could hide easily. I mean, you could slip in, slip out. Nobody you knew of it. There were probably 1,900 people who didn't even know you existed. So being part of a church that says, this is an experience for me that in which I'm lifting up other people, I'm growing closer to Jesus, I'm being stronger in the times of terrible times because I'm able to connect with other people who are walking that walk with me, ought to be pulsating through us. If we're, I don't know, I mean, obviously in the last 22 months, we've had ample opportunity to be gone from each other. We've through the early stages of the pandemic to times when we've said, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, or whatever, and we've been apart from each other because of that. I guess a fair question to ask of us is, if we've been apart from each other and it hasn't made us ache a little bit, where are we at with that? What are we doing with that? And it's a fair question because I can ask it myself of me. Am I okay with not being with brothers and sisters? Or can't I hardly wait to get back with them so we can share experiences and share struggles and share the things in our walks of life that we need each other for? Is that a fair question to ask? Okay. Let's move on here because I don't want to bring this lesson again another week if we can. I want to read this for you. Yes, I know 3 different times now I've promised you that I'm not going to read much out of the book. So there's some grace and forgiveness for unintentional lies. Okay, conversion can happen, and I want you to listen for the question I'm going to ask at the end. Conversion can happen inside or outside the church. It can be a solitary experience or one you share with friends and peers, but it should always result in you linking together with the church. Just out of curiosity, were any of you ever converted as part of a group where, like, you were in a Bible study or you were in a group that was searching together, and collectively, even though at the core there is your own conversion, but you kind of came to that moment together? Does it ever make you wonder what it looks like in Acts 2:38, where these 3,000 people were baptized the same day? I mean, they weren't all having individual Bible studies. I mean, they were all there at the moment together. Have any of you, I mean, obviously not part of 3,000, but have any of you ever had that experience of being with a group of other people who said, we've made this decision individually and collectively that we want to give our lives over to Christ, that we want to be part of a body? Maybe it's pretty odd that that's ever happened. Maybe the individual instance is way more common. But I thought about that when I read this, that I don't know if I've ever heard of that in the modern day era, but I'm sure it's probably happened. When the Bible describes our conversion as adoption, we see this corporate dimension. Sometimes the English language obscures how often the Bible speaks of spiritual growth in the plural. Where it says you, it often means you all, or in the Southern, y'all. A clear example comes in Galatians 4:4-5. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. This English translation retains the gender-specific sons to reflect their privileged hereditary position in the ancient world. But this promise applies to all men and women who believe in Jesus. When God adopts you, when he gives you the gift of faith in his Son, he welcomes you into the spiritual family of brothers and sisters. That is the church. Have we thought of that really? That when we become a member of the church, we use the phrase, how many of you grew up using the phrase brothers and sisters all the time? How many of you referred to people? Like, I remember one time, I don't know if it's a funny story, I mean, it's funny to me, but once I went across the street, I was so used to people at our church calling them Brother Smith and Brother Thomas and Sister Williams or whatever it might be, that I went across the street with my mom one time to deliver some cookies to a neighbor, and I said, here's some cookies for you, Brother Eifert. Well, Brother Eifert wasn't a brother, which thankfully, in the goodness and the godliness of my mom, did not correct me to that in front of him. But when we got home, she actually talked about kind of what it meant to be a brother and sister, that we have this. Here's what that word means, Dave. Here's what we're referring to that, and whenever that happened. And we talked about it all the time. I never addressed here comes an older person thing again, at church as Mr. and Mrs. It was always brother and sister. We talk about each other as brothers and sisters. We may not reflect that in the way that, like, I'll never say probably Sister Pryor, but I might refer to Connie as my spiritual sister. We've gotten away from that, but that thought about that's somebody in my family that I have a shared struggle with, a shared walk with, a shared glory eventually in heaven when we leave this earth, should be a wonderful thing, should be an incredibly invigorating thing that I have brothers and sisters. Now, we're all different. Some of us maybe get on each other's nerves. I mean, I got own brothers, and we've talked about this before, that, we bring the reality of the real world into our relationships. But at the core of it, as Dennis talked about earlier, is that singular giving ourselves over to Jesus. That's our core. And no matter what stink the world puts on us in terms of our bad attitudes or whatever, our core is that we are, in fact, brothers and sisters. And when we work with each other and we're with each other, that's a critically important thing to recognize all the time, that we have each other as family. When we hope the rest of the day and when we look at each other from down the road, that we look at ourselves intently, positively, and as people to be treasured. Thanks for your comments, and we will be worshiping in 15 minutes. Different type of worship. Thank you.